The proximity alarm hit my screen at 6:07 p.m. on a Thursday. Someone was trying to clone our entire defense database. 2.3 terabytes of classified drone surveillance tech, lifted straight off the secured server I'd built from scratch. The frequency scanner on my desk started crackling with unauthorized transmission attempts. I'm Rodney Garrison, 47 years old, and I've been running digital security longer than most corporate kids have been using smartphones. 20 years, Marine Corps Communications, 2 tours in the Gulf, and now owner of Fortress Digital Security. What I built for Patriot Defense Systems wasn't just some file-sharing setup. It was a fortress protecting American military technology. The breach alert was specific. Massive download initiated from user account P. Walsh at 6:04 p.m. Preston Walsh, our new efficiency consultant. 28 years old, Harvard MBA, been with the company exactly 3 weeks, walking around like he invented business optimization. I'd seen his type during my contractor days at Quantico. Clean suit, expensive watch, talks fast about streamlining legacy systems. Translation: fire the experienced guys, blame the infrastructure when everything breaks, collect his bonus, then disappear before the real damage shows. Preston didn't just try to copy files. The logs showed something worse. At 6:05 p.m., 1 minute after the failed download, someone from his workstation attempted to rename my security protocols from Fortress Primary Vault to Patriot Strategic Access 2024 PW. The guy was trying to rebrand my entire defense network like it was a PowerPoint slide. If you've ever spent 2 decades building something invisible but critical, then watch some newcomer try to hijack it without understanding what they're touching, you know that cold feeling down your spine. It's not anger. It's recognition. Someone just stepped on a landmine they couldn't see. I didn't panic. 20 years in military communications teaches you to document first, react second. I took screenshots of the breach attempt, archived the complete audit trail with timestamps, and exported the user activity logs showing Preston's digital fingerprints all over the attempted theft. Then I did what any professional does when someone violates operational security. I sent a brief, courteous email. Preston, heads up. Your access attempt this evening triggered multiple security flags on my end. Happy to discuss proper protocols whenever convenient. I didn't expect gratitude. I definitely didn't expect what came next. Preston had been making noise about modernizing our technology stack since day one. Corporate speak for I don't understand how any of this works, so I'm going to replace it with something simpler that I can control. In the Corps, we called guys like Preston PowerPoint Rangers. They could build beautiful slide decks about efficiency, but ask them to actually run the systems they're optimizing and they'd crash everything within 48 hours. What Preston didn't know was the real story behind Patriot Defense's cybersecurity infrastructure. 5 years ago, Patriot Defense was hemorrhaging money after a failed product launch nearly killed the company. Harold Patterson had built this place from nothing, starting in his garage back in 1992. Developing surveillance drones for Border Patrol. Their IT security was held together with expired licenses, hope, and pure luck. I came in through military contractor channels during their crisis. My company, Fortress Digital Security, would build and maintain their entire operational security environment under a long-term master service agreement. That wasn't charity work. It was business. But the negotiation got intense because Patriot's board was desperate. And I knew desperate clients make dangerous decisions later when they're back on their feet. So I insisted on specific language in the contract that would protect both parties if relationship dynamics changed. Section 11C of our MSA was crystal clear. Vendor retains exclusive administrative control of hosted infrastructure and associated digital assets, unless revoked via board resolution with 30-day supervised transition protocol under Patriot legal oversight and federal compliance review. The CEO who signed that contract was Harold Patterson, a Vietnam veteran who understood contractor relationships. He knew that if you can't fund proper internal security, you better respect the vendor keeping your systems alive. Harold also knew that military contractors don't work like typical IT consultants. We build things to last. We document everything, and we always have contingency protocols. Harold's daughter Grace handled legal now, but she'd inherited the contract along with the security infrastructure she'd never personally reviewed. Preston probably saw shared drive access on some outdated org chart and assumed he could reorganize it like office supplies. Every Thursday at 4 p.m., I ran synchronization protocols with Patriot's engineering and finance teams, routine maintenance that kept their drone manufacturing operations running smoothly. Boring work to anyone who didn't understand how many ways defense contractor systems can fail catastrophically. Preston's team never attended these sessions, never asked questions about security protocols, never even acknowledged that someone outside their company was maintaining the infrastructure that allowed them to build surveillance drones for the Department of Defense. Until tonight. Until Preston decided to help himself to 2.3 terabytes of classified defense technology like he was downloading a movie. I stared at the breach logs again, cross-referencing timestamps with Patriot's internal access records. At 6:22 p.m., Preston had logged into his company account normally. At 6:04 p.m., he'd attempted the mass download. At 6:05 p.m., he tried to rename my security folders. At 6 p.m., my system automatically blocked all access from his workstation and flagged his account for administrative review. Preston had no idea that my monitoring system wasn't just watching for external threats. It was designed to track internal corporate behavior, especially from users with elevated access privileges. Every click, every file request, every attempted system modification was logged, time-stamped, and archived according to federal contractor standards. He definitely didn't know that attempting to mass download or rename contractor-controlled defense infrastructure triggered automatic legal notifications under federal compliance protocols. My notification system had already fired off copies of tonight's breach attempt to 3 different parties: Patriot's legal department, my corporate attorney, and a secured federal database that monitors cybersecurity incidents involving defense contractors. All automated, all documented, all irreversible. I closed my laptop and headed home. Preston Walsh had just declared war on infrastructure he didn't own, using weapons he didn't understand, against an opponent who'd been preparing for this exact scenario since the day I signed that contract. Tomorrow was going to be educational. The termination email arrived at 8:19 a.m. Friday morning. Subject line: action required, immediate. I clicked it expecting another efficiency memo or Preston's latest optimization framework. Instead, I found 14 words that would detonate the next 3 months of his career. Send me the admin password for the shared systems and clean out your office today. No greeting, no context, no meeting request. Just exile by email from a guy who thought cybersecurity was something you could outsource and forget about. Like firing contractors was just another item on his morning checklist. That's when it hit me. Preston had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. He saw my name on some organizational chart, probably listed under IT vendors, and assumed I was another consultant squatting on permissions he could revoke with a strongly worded email. He didn't know about the federal contractor status. He didn't know about the compliance requirements. He definitely didn't know about Section 11C. I highlighted the termination demand, copied it to a secure archive, and started typing my response. One line, negative. This infrastructure operates under federal contractor license with DoD compliance requirements. Direct all questions to your legal department. I attached a copy of the signed master service agreement, specifically pages 23 to 24, where Section 11C laid out the termination protocols in language even a Harvard consultant should understand. Then I copied Grace Patterson and hit send. Preston probably thought I was bluffing, expected me to come crawling back when my access badge stopped working. What he didn't understand was that Patriot's entire defense manufacturing backbone ran on my cloud infrastructure, maintained through my federal security clearance, monitored with tools I'd developed over 2 decades in military communications. The moment he sent that termination email, he triggered something I'd built into the contract as insurance against exactly this kind of corporate arrogance: an automatic service level agreement suspension protocol. Here's how it worked. If Patriot attempted to terminate contracted services without proper board authorization and federal compliance review, all SLA obligations dissolved immediately. Not after a meeting, not after a grace period. Immediately. The system would continue running because that was in everyone's interest. But updates, technical support, security patches, system backups, all suspended pending proper legal resolution. I opened my administrative dashboard and watched the service status indicator shift from green to amber. The countdown had officially started. Preston's email to legal came at 8:27 a.m., forwarding my response with the subject line, "Please handle this contractor issue," like I was some vendor disputing a parking ticket instead of the guy who'd kept their defense technology secure for 5 years. Grace Patterson's response arrived 12 minutes later, forwarded to Harold, with a single devastating sentence. "Walsh just terminated our primary security contractor without board authorization." I didn't need to see Harold's reply. I could practically hear the phone calls starting, emergency meetings being scheduled, damage control conversations beginning. Meanwhile, I sat in my home office completely calm. No panic, no celebration, just the quiet satisfaction that comes from watching physics take over. Gravity was going to do what gravity does. Preston had just given it a helpful push off a very high cliff. The beauty of Section 11C wasn't that it was hidden or deceptive. It was right there in plain English, clearly explained during the original contract negotiations 5 years ago. Harold Patterson had specifically asked about termination procedures because he understood that contractor relationships needed clear boundaries. What happens if we need to end this arrangement? He'd asked. Board resolution with 30-day transition protocol, I'd explained, that protects both parties. You get proper knowledge transfer. I get adequate notice to reassign resources. No surprises, no hostility, just professional transition. Harold had nodded and signed. He understood that military contractors don't work like typical vendors. We build redundancy, plan for contingencies, and always have protocols for when relationships change. Preston Walsh, on the other hand, had just tried to fire me like I was an underperforming intern. At 8:39 a.m., Grace called me directly. She sounded like someone who just realized her weekend was about to disappear. "Rod, we need to discuss Preston's email this morning." "Nothing to discuss," I replied. "He terminated services without board authorization per Section 11C. That triggers automatic SLA suspension pending proper legal review."
Can we schedule a meeting?
"Dad wants to resolve this quickly." "I'm sure he does, but the contract is clear. Board resolution required for any service termination. Until that happens, my company is released from all support obligations. Silence. Then, how long does SLA suspension last? Until proper termination procedures are followed or services are formally reinstated. Your choice." After hanging up, I activated the next phase of my contingency plan. I logged into the operations portal and implemented what I called blackout protocol. All user permissions frozen at current levels. No edits, no file transfers, no system modifications, no new user accounts. Patriots people could still view their existing files and access current dashboards, but they couldn't change anything. Every system interaction from that moment forward would be logged with a new header. Fortress Digital Security Custody Protocol board authorization required for modifications. It wasn't sabotage, it was preservation. Until Patriot followed proper procedures for contract termination, I had a legal obligation to maintain their data integrity and prevent unauthorized modifications that could compromise federal compliance standards. Preston's second email arrived at 9:15 a.m., copied to half the executive team. "Need immediate resolution on contractor access issue. Business operations affected." Business operations affected, like that was my problem to solve after he'd tried to fire me via email. The third email came at 10:33 a.m., marked urgent. "Rod, reconsider your position. We can work this out professionally. Too late for professionalism." He declared war at 8:19 a.m. Now he was living with the consequences. By lunchtime, Patriot's internal systems were in chaos. Engineering couldn't access drone design files. Finance couldn't update quarterly reports. Manufacturing couldn't pull production schedules. Customer service couldn't modify government contracts. Nothing was lost or deleted. Everything still existed, perfectly preserved and secure. They just couldn't edit any of it because editing required administrative permissions that only I controlled, and I was no longer providing technical support due to Preston's unilateral contract termination. The beauty of Blackout Protocol was its simplicity. Patriot could see everything they'd built over the past 5 years. They just couldn't touch it. Preston's fourth email arrived at 2:47 p.m. "This is affecting client deliverables. What do you want?" What did I want? I wanted him to read the contract he just violated. I wanted him to understand that defense contractor cybersecurity wasn't some commodity service he could switch on and off. I wanted him to learn that 20 years of military communications experience wasn't something you dismissed with a morning email. But mostly, I wanted him to follow the procedures that had been clearly established by people smarter than both of us. I didn't reply. The contract was my reply. Section 11C was my reply. The frozen systems were my reply. By 5 p.m., Patriot's entire operational infrastructure was effectively paralyzed. Not broken, not compromised, just locked in place while Preston learned the difference between shared drives and contractor-controlled defense systems. Weekend was coming. This was going to be interesting. Monday morning hit Patriot Defense like a freight train. I wasn't there to witness the chaos, but my automated monitoring system painted a vivid picture through access logs and failed requests. The first SOS came at 7:43 a.m. from the product development team. Is the project roadmap system down for maintenance? Can't access Q4 deliverables folder. Then finance at 8:12 a.m. Emergency Q4 budget projections showing reference errors across all worksheets. Need immediate IT support. Marketing chimed in at 8:31 a.m. Increasingly desperate. Analytics dashboard completely frozen. Client presentation in 2 hours. Someone please help. That's what happens when your infrastructure isn't a tool you own. It's a person, and that person just got fired by email on a Friday afternoon. Every attempted file modification, every failed system access, every blocked user request pinged my monitoring system automatically. I ignored them all. I was no longer under contract to provide technical support thanks to Preston's unilateral termination decision. By 9:15 a.m., Patriot's internal communications had devolved into panic mode. Engineering teams couldn't access critical drone specifications for a Pentagon deadline. Finance couldn't process federal contract payments. Someone in manufacturing found old production files on my personal drive from 2019. Anyone else have backups? The response was immediate and crushing. Personal drives were never supposed to have classified data. Everything was centralized through the secure system. The secure system Preston had just cut them off from. At 10:23 a.m., a junior engineer asked the question that made everything clear. Why does every screen now say property of Fortress Digital Security at the bottom? Is that normal? 2 minutes later, that message was deleted, but screenshots live forever. By 10:30 a.m., half the company understood what had actually happened. They hadn't lost access to their computer systems. They'd lost access to someone else's infrastructure they'd been borrowing for 5 years. Preston's emergency all-hands meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. Monday morning. I learned about it through automated calendar notifications that were still forwarding to my system. Another oversight on their part. The meeting invitation was titled Operational Updates, Infrastructure Transition. Infrastructure transition, like this was a planned upgrade, instead of a 5-alarm disaster caused by his own incompetence. I didn't attend, obviously, but the fallout reached me through multiple channels. Grace Patterson called at 11:47 a.m., sounding like someone watching a controlled demolition go sideways. Rod, we need to talk about the situation. Half the department heads are demanding explanations for why their teams can't access basic work files. Maybe because Preston violated federal contractor protocols and triggered automatic service suspension. Dad wants to meet with you today, emergency session. I don't work for Patriot anymore. Preston terminated my services Friday morning. Rod, please. People are calling Pentagon liaisons to explain why deliverables are delayed. We've got 12 departments that can't function. Then maybe you should follow the contract procedures that were established 5 years ago. At 1:15 p.m. my phone rang. Harold Patterson. I let it go to voicemail. He called back twice. On the third call, I answered. Rod, we need to resolve this immediately. Good afternoon, Harold. How can Fortress Digital Security help you today? He caught the formal tone. This isn't the time for games. Preston made a mistake. But we've got Pentagon contracts, deadlines approaching, people who can't do their jobs. Preston didn't make a mistake. He made a decision. He decided to terminate contractor services without following established procedures. What do you want? Financial compensation? Just name your terms. I want your board to follow the contract procedures you signed 5 years ago. Board resolution for service termination, proper transition protocols, federal compliance review. Harold's frustration was obvious. That could take weeks. Board members are scattered across time zones. You needed immediate resolution before Preston fired me. Now you need proper procedure. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but the outcome was inevitable. Harold could offer money, apologies, even Preston's head on a platter, but he couldn't change the fact that federal contractor agreements have specific termination procedures for good reasons. At 3:30 p.m., I received an email that made everything worthwhile. Preston Walsh's resignation letter, forwarded by mistake by someone in HR who'd mixed up email addresses. The letter was brief and professional, but the subtext was clear. He was jumping ship before the real consequences hit. His replacement was announced 2 hours later. Casey Fletcher, crisis management specialist with defense contractor experience. Casey's first email came that evening. Rod, I understand there's been a communication breakdown. I'd like to discuss our infrastructure partnership going forward. Infrastructure partnership. At least someone understood what this was. I replied briefly, services suspended per Section 11C pending board resolution. Contract available through legal department. All questions should be directed to Patriots Council. Tuesday morning brought fresh chaos. Without Preston to blame anymore, Harold had to explain to his board of directors why their entire company was effectively locked out of its own operational systems. The board meeting was scheduled for Wednesday morning, emergency session. Meanwhile, Patriots employees were getting creative. Some teams were sharing files through personal cloud accounts, a massive security violation that would have gotten them fired under normal circumstances. Others were reconstructing work from email attachments and printed documents. The facilities manager even tried calling building maintenance to fix the internet, thinking it was a connectivity issue. By Tuesday afternoon, word was spreading through their industry networks. Competitors were asking questions. Clients were getting nervous, and trade publications were starting to notice that Patriots' usually prompt responses had slowed to a crawl. I monitored it all through automated systems and professional contacts, watching Preston's 15-minute power trip turn into a company-wide crisis that would take months to fully resolve. The final irony came Tuesday evening. An automated security report generated by my own monitoring system documented 5 days of unauthorized attempts to access contractor-controlled infrastructure. The report was automatically forwarded to 3 parties per federal compliance requirements: Patriots' legal team, my corporate attorney, and a federal contractor oversight database. Preston's original attempt to steal 2.3 terabytes of data was now officially part of a federal cybersecurity incident report, complete with timestamps, user identification, and detailed forensic analysis. Wednesday's board meeting was going to be very educational for everyone involved. Wednesday's emergency board meeting convened at 9 a.m. sharp. I wasn't invited, obviously, but the aftermath reached me through multiple channels within hours. Grace Patterson called at 11:30 a.m., and for the first time since this started, she sounded relieved instead of panicked. The board voted unanimously to reinstate your contract. Full restoration of services. Dad wants to discuss expanding our partnership. What about the federal compliance review? We're bringing in external auditors, and Preston's unauthorized access attempt is being handled through appropriate channels. His resignation letter mentioned pursuing other opportunities, but the board was well aware of what actually happened. The formal documents arrived that afternoon. Proper board resolution, signatures from all voting members, revised service agreement with additional protections against unilateral termination attempts. Harold had learned his lesson about respecting contractor boundaries, but the real satisfaction came from the restoration process. I didn't flip a switch and fix everything. Instead, I initiated careful, methodical system reactivation over 72 hours. Every step documented, every change logged, every restored capability verified through multiple security checks. Thursday morning, I reactivated read access for critical systems, payroll, client communications, emergency operational files. Department heads could finally update project statuses and respond to client inquiries that had been backing up for 6 days. Friday, I restored full file editing capabilities and system modifications, but with enhanced monitoring protocols. Every user action would now be tracked with additional detail, and any unusual access patterns would trigger immediate notifications. By the following Monday, Patriots' systems were running better than ever. The forced downtime had given me opportunity to implement security updates and performance optimizations scheduled for later. The human cost was significant, though. 3 major clients had delayed contract renewals due to Patriots' communication gaps during the crisis. 2 department heads had submitted resignations, citing operational instability and concerns about management decision-making. Casey Fletcher spent his first month just rebuilding relationships and explaining to various stakeholders why their primary vendor had temporarily suspended services. Harold called me personally on Monday after full restoration. "Rod, I owe you an apology. Preston's actions were unacceptable, and the board takes full responsibility for not providing proper oversight." Apology accepted, but let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Agreed. We're implementing mandatory contractor relations training for all senior management. No one gets to make decisions about vendor agreements without understanding the legal implications. Smart policy. You might also want to review your hiring practices. Preston's background check should have caught his tendency to make unilateral decisions without understanding consequences. 3 weeks later, I received the final piece of validation. A federal cybersecurity compliance audit triggered by Preston's original data theft attempt concluded that Fortress Digital Security had maintained exemplary security protocols and appropriate response procedures during an unauthorized access incident. The audit report specifically noted that my decision to activate blackout protocol and suspend services had prevented potential data compromise and maintained system integrity during a period of corporate leadership instability. Preston Walsh's name appeared in that federal report as perpetrator of unauthorized access attempts against contractor-controlled infrastructure. That report would follow him to any future employer requiring security clearance or federal contractor status. 6 months after the crisis, I attended an industry conference in Denver where Harold Patterson was giving a keynote on vendor relationships and modern corporate architecture. I sat in the back row, curious to hear how he'd frame the experience. We learned that critical infrastructure partnerships require the same level of attention and respect as any other strategic business relationship. He told the audience, "You can't treat contractors like disposable vendors, especially when they're maintaining systems that your entire operation depends on." Someone asked about operational transparency and vendor oversight. Harold cleared his throat. We had what you might call a learning experience. A new executive assumed he could terminate our primary security contractor unilaterally without understanding the legal and operational implications. The resulting system lockdown affected our entire company for nearly a week. He paused, then added something that surprised me. The contractor was completely within his rights to suspend services. We violated our own contract procedures and faced the consequences. It was expensive, embarrassing, and entirely avoidable if we'd simply followed the agreements we'd signed. Someone asked about cost implications, around $800,000 in direct costs. Harold replied, plus immeasurable damage to our reputation and vendor relationships. After his presentation, I approached Harold in the lobby. He saw me coming and actually smiled. "Rod, didn't expect to see you here. Good presentation. Honest assessment of what happened. Well, if you're going to mess up that badly, might as well learn something and help others avoid the same mistake." Any word on Preston's new position? Harold's expression darkened slightly. Last I heard, he was working for a consulting firm in Phoenix. His security clearance was denied due to incidents involving unauthorized access to federal contractor systems. Makes it hard to find defense work. Consequences tend to follow people, I observed. They do indeed. As I reflected on the experience, I realized Preston had tried to fire me assuming I was some disposable contractor. Instead, he discovered that military communications experience and federal credentials aren't things you dismiss casually. The contract protections I'd built weren't meant to be weapons. They were boundaries, professional safeguards protecting both parties. Preston crossed those boundaries deliberately. The consequences weren't revenge, they were physics. Actions and reactions, documented in legal language and executed through systems I'd built for exactly this situation. Today, Fortress Digital Security is busier than ever. Reputation spreads through professional networks, and professionalism under pressure is the currency that matters most. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't those who shout threats. They're the quiet professionals who built the infrastructure you depend on and know exactly how to defend it when boundaries are crossed. In the corporate world, respect isn't earned through titles or aggressive emails. It's earned by understanding what you're dealing with before you try to control it. Because competence backed by proper legal frameworks always outlasts arrogance backed by assumptions. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the loudest threat or the biggest stick. It's the quiet professional who built the infrastructure everyone depends on and knows exactly when to remind them who really holds the keys.